What's good, my fellow producers? I'm back today with another tutorial, and we're going to be focusing on designing and processing robot bass in Ableton Live. So, quick little note before we start this tutorial. If you don't have Camel Fat by Camel Audio, definitely recommend go grabbing that. And if you can't afford that or you can't find it online or whatever, definitely recommend go checking out Camel Crusher. It's just the distortion part of Camel Fat. It doesn't have all the filters and LFOs and stuff, but it'll definitely do the job. It definitely gets some good grit out of the bass if you're interested, like me. So yeah, other than that, let's get started. I'm basically going to show you guys a few patches that I've made, and I'm not going to go too in-depth on the specific patches, but rather talk about how I processed it and the reasons why I chose those processing effects. So this first bass patch we have here is I used a couple of massives and the Camel Fat, and then some pre-processing effects. That one is a really it was a growl. It's like a robot growl. Kind of reminds me a little bit of kind of recoily almost. That was made using Massive, and I got a few I made using Operator. And if you're interested in learning how to design Operator bass, I have a Neuro bass tutorial up, and it focuses solely on Operator. So here's this one. Sounds like a transformer, like engine starting up or something. So I thought that was really cool. Sounded really robot-y. Here's a good metallic wub, just really, really metallic. That's pretty cool. Here's a really cool, like, screechy stab robot. I really like that one. That was one of my favorites. Then we have this guy over here, and this is just like a really kind of movie robot sound. Now, you can design robot bass in any synth. The way I like to start is FM. FM is a great way to start because all it takes is turning a couple of knobs and it starts to sound like a robot. It's when you're feeding oscillators into other oscillators, it just kind of has that effect naturally if you fine-tune the parameters correctly. Sometimes it comes out more filtery, sometimes it comes out more growly, but there's sometimes where it sounds very robotic just from the get-go. And if you're looking to design a very robotic bass, then that's the way to go. But one thing I like to tell people is if you're going to try to start designing bass, you want to have, unless you're really experimenting, you want to have the idea of the bass before you start going into it. So if you want like robot bass, you want it to sound like a robot. If you want like a growl robot bass, then you can make a growl bass and then use robot processing. Or if you want a neuro robot, you can kind of process it like neuro, or build a robot bass, process it like neuro bass, or you can build a neuro bass and process it like robot bass. So there's the patch and then there's the processing, and you can't really they're integrally connected, but you can't separate them. So I think it's important to kind of like do the correct processing for your specific patch, but there's specific ways to get the sound that you want also. And what it's all about is knowing what plugins to use if you want this sound. If you want growls and more vocal sounds, you're going to need to do filtering, filter sweeping, EQ sweeping, frequencies, modulating frequencies and stuff like that. That's going to get you a growl sound. So I'm going to go over what gets you the bass, or what gets you the robot sound. And so we can start with just Massive if you're, just to kind of show you guys how powerful Massive can be on its own. I'm not going to really go over Operator in depth. I have another video on that, and if you guys watch that, you can hear it. So I'll focus a little more on Massive this time. But I know inside of Massive, a few things that are really important are using the correct wavetables is definitely number one. Not the correct ones, there's no such thing as the right ones, but using the ones that have the sound that you want. A lot of people that like growl bass, for example, use Modern Talking. I mean, it's overused, but people still use it today. And it just because when you modulate the wavetable position knob, it gives you a vocal sound, and that's a good place to start, you know. So I use, for robot bass, I like to use Carbon and Scrapyard. Those are two of my favorite ones for robot bass because they already have a lot of potential. And just to show you what I mean by that is, I'll solo everything out. This is just massive, no outside effects, no layering, nothing, just carbon, actually, just the carbon oscillator. The wavetable is being adjusted by this envelope right here. So, turn it up a little bit. So yeah, it already has a really robotic sound. We'll add the Scrapyard over it. Alright, so it's getting even better because that Scrapyard has like an FM buzz. And I added a sine under it too. And the way I make the sine stick out in massive, because if you're filtering it, you're going to be losing a lot of your sine wave. So if I go into the routing tab right there, and I click on the B next to the oscillator, what that B stands for is it's going to be sending that oscillator to your bypass module over here, so you can turn it up and it will bypass all the filters, everything. It'll just be a sine wave. So that's how I add a sub in my massive patches. Really cool, really easy way. I put phase. Phase is very important for massive robot bass. Phase on oscillator 1, which is the carbon oscillator, and I turned the pitch up 1 octave. So you already have really gnarly robot bass to begin with. They definitely want to try out comb filters and like notch filters or band reject filters. Those are really good because they just add more movement and sound, and it adds the right kind of movement to me. I like the notch filter adds a more like kind of sweepy, like a kind of effect, and the comb filter adds a really kind of pitched, tubey kind of weird. Sounds like you're stretching it inside of a tube. It's kind of hard to explain, but if you turn up the feedback a lot, you can hear what you hear that, and then when you turn it down a little bit, it's a little bit more subtle and robotic though. Like, I don't like that pitch, it's a little bit too much. So if you turn the dampening up and the feedback a little bit up, but not too far up, and you adjust the pitch, like you modulate the pitch with an envelope, you get some really profound sounds. I like more subtle movement at this point. One thing I like to mention real quick is how I layer my massives. Sorry. I'm going to mention how I layer my massives real quick. So what I do is I create an instrument rack. So I just Command G my massive and it groups it automatically. And then I will copy that massive over and duplicate it. So we have two massives stacked on top of each other. And what this... now you have two of the same massive patches over, right? So you choose one of the massives and you go into the voicing tab. I like to turn the unisono up, pitch cutoff on, and the pan position on. Turn the pitch cutoff a little bit up and the pan position towards full inversion, or full, doesn't really matter. And what that does is it's going to basically have that same sound from the first time, but it's going to kind of spread it and make it a little bit more phased. And I also tweaked the patch just a little bit to give it a little bit more character. But when you stack those sounds on top of each other, you get a much better, much thicker sound. So that's really cool. But that's just the patch. And if you have a lot of patches that you like, but you just want to make them more robotic, or if you have patches that already sound robotic and you want to make them, here is where you're going to be interested in. So the first thing I do when I'm trying to do processing is I have to have an audio effect rack. The reason why I like audio effects racks is we can parallel process our bass right there. And parallel processing means you're basically not... If I were to put any sort of plugin on this, right, you have a dry-wet knob. And if it's at 50%, you're getting 50% wet and 50% dry. Well, with this, instead, I would put in a plugin, turn the dry wet up on that plugin, and since I have 2 chains, I have one chain with the plugin and one chain that doesn't have the plugin. And what that's doing is it's splitting the signal of the bass, and you have one going through the plugin and one that's going through not going through the plugin, which gives you parallel processing, and you have individual volume control over your dry and wet signals. So it's a lot better. You don't compromise any of your original bass sound for the effect. So it's really, really cool, neat way to start processing any sort of drums or bass. It's really, really important. So let's see. The effects that I use to process robot bass are generally just filters, delays, and reverbs. And I know that sounds pretty crazy and simple, but it really is that simple. We put a simple delay on one of these chain effects, and we can solo that, turn the dry wet up, and I'll explain how this works. We're gonna link the delay time so it's not left and right panned, and we're gonna turn off sync because it doesn't go down to a fast enough delay. We want it to be about under 30 or 40 milliseconds, and we turn the feedback up, maybe to 50% or so, and we'll hear what that sounds like by itself, just the delay 100%. Back up to get you more dramatic effect. So it's really interesting how that works, actually. And let's see, maybe turn that down. And when we layer that with the original bass, it sounds really cool. And what's cool is if you you can even begin automating things at this point. Automate the feedback knob of the delay. So I find the longer the time, the more wide and fat it sounds, just because there's more phase. So that's really cool. That's why simple delay is awesome, is because it can really create that metallic sound. But I really like to use resonators, because resonators are basically the same thing, but it's 5 simple delays. And what's really cool about this is all of those delays are actually tuned. The timing of the delay is tuned to a specific note. And so since this is a G note, I'm going to turn it on G0, turn the dry wet up, turn the filter off, and the decay a little bit down, and the color all the way up, and we'll solo that. Now what's cool is it has 5 simple delays, and what you'll do is you can add octaves or add certain steps. You can add 1 step up or 11 steps down to add some inharmonic notes, if you like dissonance like I do. If you like this kind of music, you probably like dissonance. Turn the gain up a little bit. Alright, so let's see what that sounds like. And we can even add the other delay on top of that to see what it sounds like. That's really awesome. So the next and last thing I'm going to go over is some camel fat. And this is where I just end up making it probably destroy the sound, but it sounds cool to me, so that's all that matters. And this distortion part of the thing is what I like to focus on. Turn the mech up barely. It's too much sometimes. The mech is very powerful. It's clipping like out the ass, so turn that down, turn the tube up and the exciter up. Turn the mech up a little bit because it's fat. I'm gonna use the comb filter right here, and the comb filter is fucking awesome. Oh, the LFO's on. That's why. That sounds pretty cool though. So there you go. You're starting to get a little bit more robot bass there. All right, so from here, you're pretty much good to go into resampling and starting to write your bass. So yeah, I hope you guys liked this video. I hope you guys learned something, and if you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like my Facebook page, and you know, leave any comments down below if you guys have any suggestions on future videos or any critiques on how I should make these better and more educational. So I guess that's pretty much it for me. This is Gaia, and I'm out.